Hi and welcome to another Checiegirl Creations video. So in the spirit of mermaid, I'll be doing a mermaid in watercolor, and I didn't join in this year, as you guys have probably guessed, but I thought it would be fun to do at least one illustration. So my idea behind this illustration was I wanted her to be a bit more like more of an original mermaid. So like they're supposed to be like darker and not all friendly and stuff like you sometimes see in the media. So I wanted her to like look a bit more darker, and so I gave her webbed hands, and I also go with a darker color palette, a dark and cool color palette. The colors I use is Phthalo blue, burnt umber, Viridian, some white, and then gold, some Winsor Newton gold ink for like accents. And the watercolors I'm using is also by Winsor Newton, is the Cotman set, so it's student watercolors. And the paintbrushes I'll be using are by Hobbycraft, and they are round brushes. Those are the ones I've been using for a while, and they're actually really good. So all materials will be listed below in detail, just in case I've missed anything. And yeah, so I sketched everything off camera, and I used my mechanical pencil like normal. And I did quite a bit of planning for this one. I swatched a lot. All through the painting I was swatching to try to make sure I got the colors right. I did make a couple mistakes that I'll point out as I like go along. Like I went a lot darker than I was supposed to with the colors. So I lightened the sketch with a kneadable eraser like I normally do, kind of like pressing or rolling over the sketch. But really I shouldn't have done that, because I went so dark that I couldn't even see my sketch, which was a bit irritating. So I kind of, when putting details back in, it was quite challenging, but thankfully I was able to do so. And the reason I didn't ink this is because I was using my left hand, and I knew that my left hand wouldn't be steady enough to ink the sketch. So I thought I would just use my paintbrush for everything. Even when I'm adding details with my paintbrush, my left hand isn't very steady, but I have a bit more control with a paintbrush than I do like a pen or pencil. So yeah, so for the background, like the sea, I use Viridian and burnt umber. And I gave it like a wash all in the background. I didn't want it to be like just on a white background. This is why I decided to have like a colored background. I thought it would be a bit more interesting and maybe kind of add to the darker feel of the illustration. And the colors I use, since it's such a small like color palette, I did do a lot of planning, and like especially when it came to the skin and the tail, like the skin and the tail both use Phthalo blue and burnt umber, but because I use more burnt umber for the skin and more Phthalo blue for the tail, it was like able to look different. And I do actually go in with white for the skin, but I'll point that out when it happens. This was really challenging, and it took quite a while for me to complete it, which is why this video is so long. There's a lot of footage in this. I hope it's not too quick, just because I didn't want it to be too long, but this is as far as I could make it without you guys missing anything. If you don't want to slow it down, there is that kind of like cog like setting icon at the bottom of like the video that you can click, and you can slow down the speed or speed it up if you want it to be a bit quicker. So that is an option. But yeah, it's probably about 6 or so hours of footage, and that's what was on the camera, because a couple times I had to turn off the camera and just really focus on like putting on the details and stuff, because it took a long time. Because my anatomy skills aren't great, it did take a while for me to like get that down. And then since I was using my left hand, everything was it just took a lot longer than an illustration like this normally would take for me. But thankfully I was able to work out most of the kinks. Her hands do look a bit strange, but that's fine. I'm pretty happy with it overall. So once I like put the background in, I decided that I wanted to have some gold in the background, but I didn't want it to be like really stark and out there. So I went in with another wash of the same color I used for the background. I just basically watered it down a bit more because I didn't want it to get too dark. And as I put the wash in, I like had another paintbrush handy that I was dabbing gold into. So I put a bit of gold in my palette, I watered it down a little bit, and then I went in and dabbed it in, which is why you can see me using both hands. And I thought that was quite a cool like technique, and it gave it a really nice look. And it also helped because I wasn't able to get a flat wash on the background, since like my left hand couldn't move fast enough for it to like have a flat wash. I thought adding the kind of cauliflower look intentionally actually made everything look okay. So I was really happy with how that turned out. And now for her hair. So her hair, I actually ended up going really big, which probably isn't a surprise if you've been following me for a while. I do tend to make hair quite big. And yeah, so I thought it would be really cool to have it just behind her and like just kind of flowing outwards. I thought that would look kind of nice. So I decided to go for that look. And at first I was thinking that a few strands might kind of go over her arms and stuff like that. But I actually decided not to do that. I decided to just stick with the hair being in the background, and I do like how that turned out. And for her hair, I mixed Phthalo Blue, Viridian, and Burnt Umber. So it was a really small amount of Viridian because I didn't want the hair to like blend in with the background. I only really use Viridian on the background, just a tiny bit in the hair, and then a lot of blue and Burnt Umber to get that almost black look. And yeah, so, and I also wanted it to look kind of like slightly wavy and curly, so I didn't make like the outline of the hair like straight. I wanted it to be kind of wavy, since it is kind of supposed to be in the water. So yeah, and the position I like sketched her in, I thought maybe is like she's standing off, like maybe kind of when you're warning someone, so you try to look kind of scary, like that kind of standoff position. So that's kind of what I was going for when I was sketching her. And one thing I didn't like, since her hair was behind her, I should have put ears in, but I just completely forgot to like sketch them in. It would have been really cool for me to have like pointed kind of elf ear kind of things going on, but by the time I realized that, the hair was already down, so it was a bit late, but that's okay, maybe next time. But yeah, I did completely forget about ears, but that's fine. So have any of you joined in Mermay? I have enjoyed like looking at a lot of people I follow on Instagram and like their Mermay creations. It's really cool to see like how everyone puts their own spin on it. So like, have you done Mermay? Did you like use somebody else's prompts, or did you come up with your own prompts? And have you completed it? Like, you know, if you started it off, like how has it gone for you? Let me know in the comments below. So now for the skin. This was like the most challenging area because most of the areas were quite small, and you'll see that like the first go it's very blotchy because I was struggling to like kind of keep up with how fast the paint was drying since it's been very warm. The weather's been lovely, but because of that the paint's actually been drying a lot faster, so that was quite tricky to try to keep up with. So I did struggle a bit with that, and this is when I made my first mistake, and the skin was a lot like way too dark. So this is why like I have to add white later on in the video. You see I'll add white because like at one point she's kind of getting lost in her hair, but I wanted her hair to look really dark to kind of contrast with the background. So I decided to try to add white to her, and that worked in like most areas. In some areas it kind of does look like she's disappearing a little bit, but I was able to salvage it quite well. And I did forget to like put her hair, she was supposed to have a little bit of hair kind of like in her face, so I did forget to put that in, so I did have to add that in afterwards. So yeah, when I did that, I kind of blended it out so there wouldn't be too many hard edges. I do add a lot of layers. Now this paint isn't great for layers. They pick up really easily, so when I was having to add lots of layers, that was quite difficult. Thankfully, by the time I added lots of details, you couldn't really see all the mistakes I had made. But yeah, that was quite difficult working with paint that's not very good at layering. This paint does tend to want to lift a lot. So I went in with the tail next. I really love the tail color I mixed. That was a really pretty color. I also really like the hair color as well. I wonder if that's a kind of Payne's Grey. Like, I've never seen Payne's Grey in person, but I wonder if that is a Payne's Grey. You can see even the tail was quite blotchy, but I was able to get the tail a little bit flatter than I was the skin. Yeah, so, and again, for her tail, like her tail fin, I wanted it to be kind of wavy on the end. I didn't really want it to be very straight. And my initial plan for the crown was to make it only gold, but I thought it would be nice to kind of have a background of watercolor on the crown, just in case I wanted to not add that much gold. So I went in with the blue. And if I was just sticking with the blue and no gold, I think that would have been really nice, because it kind of like pulled the piece together by adding blue on the bottom and the top of the illustration. So I thought that was quite a nice look. So that's like all the first layers done, and I thought it would be nice to add another layer to the sea, or like the background, because I wanted to add more gold, and I wanted to drop in some like just plain old like Viridian to add some more varying colors to the background. So again, I just went over with a wash. I had a lot of water and quite a big mix in my palette. And then I would go in with like the Viridian. So I'll pick up some Viridian, kind of mix it in slightly with my background color, and then I would drop it in. And then I would go in and drop in the gold with another paintbrush. Having the gold on another paintbrush meant that I wasn't wasting time rinsing out my paintbrush. So that just made things a bit quicker so that I could keep up with how quickly the paint was drying. And I went in with a lot of water. The paper does warp a lot. This paper isn't very thick. I think it's 190 GSM. It's from Hobbycraft. I'll link the video where I make the watercolor blocks if you would like to see how I did that. And yeah, so it warped a lot, but it was fine. I didn't mind the valleys and stuff since I wasn't really going for a flat wash. And since I was adding like all those like cauliflower bits with the gold, it worked out pretty well. So yeah, so this is when I really liked the background, and afterwards I left the background as it was. What I thought was quite cool is that when I dropped in the gold, sometimes it would kind of run into like the valleys of the paper when it was warping. So you had some like very small mica flakes in the background, as well as those like kind of big swells of gold. So yeah, so I really like the background after this, and I think also like dropping in the Viridian also helped just give the background a bit more depth and more interest, because it looked kind of like flat before. It didn't really have that kind of wow factor I was looking for. So now I'm going in with another layer of the skin. Again, this made it go even darker than I wanted it to, but I really needed to smooth out the skin, and again, it didn't really work out as well as I wanted it to. It did flatten out a bit more though than the first layer. But this is when I realized I would have to add white, because like you couldn't see the details at all. Yeah. Oh, and when I was dabbing in, like I kind of went over a section. I accidentally dabbed gold onto her face, so I had to kind of pick that up. But thankfully I was able to pick that up before it dried too quickly. Oh, and that ink, when I first added the gold to the background, I had some left over in my palette, but I didn't wipe it out. And I didn't realize, but this ink isn't actually permanent, so I was able to reconstitute it, which was useful for this painting, since I had quite a bit of ink left over. So I thought I would just mention that, just in case you guys have this Winsor Newton ink. It's not permanent, so yeah. Okay, so since the paper had warped quite a bit, I decided to remove it from the block. So I just went in with the palette knife and just kind of cut away the hot glue that was on the edge so it would separate from the block. And yeah, and I would leave it underneath like some books and stuff overnight while it was drying so it would flatten out a bit, so I can work on it a bit easier. So now I'm adding in the initial details. Most of these don't stay because I do go over her with white later on. So yeah, I just went in basically with a darker color of like her skin color. So I just had a bit more burnt umber in it. And I added in the details. Most of it I did off camera just because my head kept on getting in the way while I was adding the details. But yeah, so that's like the first layer of details. And now I'm going in with the hair. I found the hair was kind of looking patchy, so I wanted to smooth that out as well. And I thought I would do that before I like really fix up her upper body, so that I wouldn't like mess up the upper body if I was adding in more details with the hair. So yeah, so same color, I just trying to smoothen it out. And again, because this paint isn't great for layering, it did pick up a lot, which did it still was patchy, so I wasn't able to get a really nice like wash over that. I was going for more of a flatter wash with her hair, but you'll see how I fix that like later on. A lot of the details I actually add later on is very much just trying to go with the flow and just covering up a lot of mistakes, or just making the things that were mistakes look as if they were planned. Yeah, sometimes you just have to go with it and just try your best to make it look as if it was planned. So now I'm going in with her tail. I thought I would try to flatten that out a little bit more so it wasn't so patchy. I was planning to add scales anyway, but I figured you would probably be able to see that patchiness quite easily. So I added another layer, especially since everything also was getting really dark. I thought I would try to bring that up a little bit. Now, I didn't want all my tones to match, which is kind of what happened, especially with the skin and the hair. Like this, they were so close in tones that they weren't standing out. So yeah, so there's a lot of like things that you can learn from my mistakes with this one. Yeah, so now I basically mixed the skin color, the phthalo blue and burnt umber, and just added some Chinese white. And I added quite a bit of white, and that helped lighten it out a lot, but then it did make it really opaque. So I did end up kind of, when you add white to your watercolors, you take away that like transparency that's always nice when it comes to watercolors, because like with the whole point of watercolors, like when you're layering up, you can see the layers before, but this was like the only way I could save it, so I decided to just add the white. Sometimes I do use white watercolor, but mostly just to add highlights. I like to add highlights with white watercolor because it kind of, I like to highlight in layers, so I would have like a more transparent highlight with the watercolors, and then I might add more highlights with like a white gel pen or gouache or something like that. So I did end up looking quite opaque, but thankfully it did work out later on. So yeah, and I don't know if I've re-added the, oh yes, there was quite a bit of footage that was missed, mostly because I did turn off the camera just to kind of fix things up. So once I added in like the skin, and I added a few layers of that actually, because since like the layers do pick up, even the first layer, it still looked very dark. So I had to add quite a few layers of the skin with like the skin color mixed with white so that it would stand out. And then I made the webbed part of her hands a lighter blue, like a light blue version of the tail color. And yeah, so, oh, and one of her hands as well, I struggled a lot. Like that went through quite a few ugly phases. So it took a while for me to fix everything, add in the details. But once I did, like everything looked a lot better. So now I'm adding in the scales of the tail. First I went in with like a darker version of the blue. And then I went in with a lighter version of the blue. I added white scales, gold scales. Yep, I think those are all the colors I used for the scales. I thought I would go all out with the scales. Since she's supposed to be like a mystical creature, why not? So yeah, and when I added all those layers, I thought that would look really cool because it added a lot more depth to her tail than if I just added blue scales. And then with her tail, like her the tail fin, I kind of added wavy lines, kind of bursting out from like the start of the tail like to the end of the tail, and I thought that looked really pretty. And again, I used the dark blue, the light blue, white, and gold. And this white is pretty opaque. I don't know if this is like very normal for white watercolors for it to be this opaque. And I don't know if like professional watercolors would be better. I'm guessing they would be. But yeah, this was a really nice, I was able to get some pretty opaque highlights with this. And it kind of looked as if I was using gouache, but I didn't. It was all watercolors, which was really nice. Oh, and another thing, like when you want to get quite bright highlights with your white watercolor, what I tend to do is I kind of spritz some water, and then just kind of leave it sitting there to activate quite a bit of the white, and then I have more of a thicker watercolor than usual, so that then when I go in to add the highlights, they do stand out a little bit more than just going in with it really watered down, because then it'll just kind of disappear. And you'll see that as well, like I do go in and add like 2 layers to the darker blue scales, and then I think I do add a couple more, like some of the lighter blue scales I do have to add like another layer just to kind of brighten it up so it would stand out. And I didn't go in like perfect rows, like when I was adding the dark blue, I missed a few areas so that like some areas would have light blue and then some would have white and some would have gold, so I wanted to look a bit more natural. And I did the same thing on the crown as well. I went in with like dark blue highlights, light blue highlights, white and gold highlights. So instead of the crown just being plain old gold, which actually when I added the gold at first, I added quite a bit thinking I still wanted it mostly gold, but it looked a bit too stark. And it stood out in not a very good way, so I decided to make it blue, mostly blue with just some gold accents, and I liked the way that looked a little bit more. I kind of had to treat this a bit more like a mixed media, or acrylic painting. Like I do tend to add lots of layers to my pieces, but that's normally when I'm going more mixed media or with my acrylics, since my watercolors don't layer very well. But since I was having to like cover up lots of mistakes and just try my best to salvage this piece, I ended up adding a lot more layers than I normally do, and I actually like the look. I like the look of all these layers of like watercolor, so I think I will try this again. And like I think also once I'm able to upgrade to like professional watercolors, it'll be even better, since like they'll be able to layer better, and I'll be able to like achieve more of a layered look without having to fight with the watercolors as much. Yeah, but I thought it looked really pretty, especially once I added the gold, and then when I added the white watercolor to the tail, it just, everything kind of came alive. So that was really cool to like see it come out of its hot mess phase. This painting spent a long time in its hot mess phase for sure, but once like everything was completed and I added all the details, everything looked a lot better. So I was really happy with like to see that improvement. Oh, and for the detailing, I'm using a Boldmere like detail paintbrush. I can't remember the exact size, but that'll be down in the material listing. Yeah, I use that for details. And for like the tail fin details, I wanted them to look kind of wavy. I didn't want it to look too straight. So especially since I can't do a straight line very well, if at all, with my left hand, I thought I would just embrace that and just make it a little bit more wavy to look as if it was like planned. Oh, and I do outline the tail with a dark blue, like the same color I used for the scales. I did outline that, and then I proceeded to add like some gold around the outside of the tail, just a little bit more watered down, so it wasn't this like as prominent. And I do add some like white highlights as well around the edges of the tail once I added like the scales, just to make things look a little bit more shiny and to add a little bit more depth. Oh, and I do add some gold to her features. At the moment she looks really scary, but once I added like the whites of her eyes, I had to add the white of her eyes using a Uniball Signal white gel pen, and then I went over with some white watercolor just to kind of smoothen it out, and then I was able to go back in and re-add the details, like the darker skin color details, as well as some gold details to like her eyes, her eyelashes, her eyebrows, and her lips. The only thing I didn't add gold to was her nose, because it looked a bit strange when I did, so I just covered that up and just added some very slight white highlights to her face. Okay, so now I'm adding details to her crown, and you can see that I've added like highlights to her face. I do like dull some of those down, especially around the nose, because it looked a bit strange. And yeah, and whenever I like needed to kind of like dull down or just push back the highlights on her face, I just went in with the same skin color instead of picking up the color. I just went in and just kind of layered that over, so it would still look slightly lighter because it's mixed with the white. But then it just wouldn't be as stark as like it is now. And yeah, so with the crown I added the gold details, and I did go in and add a bit more gold, but then it looked just too gold. So again, I just went in with like more dark blue, more light blue, and some white, but it just wasn't as bright as like the tail, especially the white highlights. I wanted it to look a bit more dull, because I wanted it to look a bit more like gold or metallic, and but not a really bright gold, more of like a duller kind of crown. So yeah, that's why I didn't go with like very bright colors like with the tail. And then for the hair, since I wasn't able to get that flat wash, and then it looked kind of boring when everything else had details, since I like added highlights to her body and like her hands and everything. So I went in with like a very watered down light blue that I used on the tail. I also went in with some of the dark blue from the tail as well, which didn't pick up, which like wouldn't stand out very much, but it did kind of pick up some of the previous watercolor. And I also went in with gold and white. I think I might have gone in with some like of the skin color as well. I pretty much use almost all the colors I use except for the background color on the hair. And since the hair was so dark, it did dull everything down, which was good because everything else was really bright, but I didn't want the hair to look as bright. I still wanted to look kind of dark. So yeah, so that's like what I did with the hair, and it was basically squiggles. Like there was no real rhyme or reason. I was just kind of squiggling, and then I went over around the outside of the hair with brighter highlights, just so it could like cut off a little bit more from the background. and I thought that looked really cool. It just added a lot more movement to her hair and like depth and just interest, because it looked kind of boring after a while. I always try to like, I do start off a lot of my watercolor paintings wanting to achieve more of a flatter look with like flat washes, but then I find it looks really boring. And then I just go in and add lots of detail. I really do I like illustrations with like more flat washes and flatter like areas like with not a lot of detail, but I can't seem to pull it off. So I always tend to add detail, which is fine. I guess that's just my thing. Yeah, so you can see that now that I've added the gold, that's when I thought it looked a bit too much. I didn't want the hair to attract all the attention. So I decided to go over with some more paint and like more white and other colors, just to kind of push back the white and the gold so that it wasn't so bright. Because I just wanted the gold to be mostly spotted if you were to like tip the paper. So on the tail and the crown and like her face, I wanted the gold to be like noticed if the paper wasn't tipped. But then for like the background on her hair, I wanted the especially her hair, I wanted you to be able to spot the gold only when you tip the paper instead of just on the flat. And yeah, so you can see some of the gold spots on the background like without tipping the paper, but yeah, that's kind of what I was going for, more of a subtle look in her hair. So once I did that, oh, the crown, when you see it there, it was a bit too bright, so I do go in like over the gold with the blue, and then it looked a lot better. Yeah, I thought it was standing out, but not in a good way. So the background looked really boring. Again, I thought I would go simple with the background, but I thought it looked really boring now. So I thought, why not add bubbles? Since it's underwater, you gotta have some bubbles. So I went in with the background color, very watered down, and added a bunch of bubbles. And a lot of them didn't stand out, but that was fine because I was going to build some layers with it. So when I went in and added all the bubbles I added a few clusters of 5 and clusters of 3, and then some singular like bubbles just to kind of fill in the space. I went in and darkened some of the bubbles that just had the background color. Then I added some Viridian to some of the bubbles as well to make them look a little bit more sea greeny. And then I also dropped in some gold. So you can see me doing that around now, like dropping in some extra color so that all the bubbles wouldn't look the same, and especially dropping in the gold actually made it look really cool. And once I did that, I went in and added like a couple highlights to each bubble so that it would look like a bubble and it wouldn't look as flat. It would give it a little bit more shape. So yeah, I did have to wait for the bubbles to like really dry. You can see there's a lot of water in those bubbles. And like because there was a lot of water, they did all dry with a kind of darker rim, which I thought was quite a cool look. So yeah, so once I added those highlights, I was happy with how the bubbles looked, but I thought the background could have added a little bit more white, but I didn't want just plain old white bubbles. So I went over and I covered the mermaid with some paper, and then I added some splashes to the background, so I went splash on her. And once I did that, I think I just added a few finishing like highlights to the mermaid, and that was it, I believe. Yeah, I think that's it. Oh, and of course I added my signature to the bottom of the paper, the painting. I first went in with light blue, but that wasn't standing out, so I went over it with white. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and like let me know what you think of the illustration. I'm really happy with it. There are some things I know I would improve, but apart from that, I'm happy with it, especially like all the ups and downs I went through with it. And yeah, let me know if you joined in a mermaid. Let me know what you think of this piece. Don't forget to give me a thumbs up if you've enjoyed the video. Please do subscribe if you're new. Don't forget to click that bell notification so you get notifications whenever I upload a new video. I upload videos every Friday. And yeah, I think that's it. So thanks again for watching, and we'll see you guys next week. Bye.